Before there was a nation, before there was a flag, before there was an idea called America, there were people, real people. People with fears, hopes, dreams, families, and beating hearts. Somewhere along the way, we started protecting the idea of America more than the people who make America possible. And when a nation forgets its people, it begins to lose its soul. Today, we don't need bigger slogans, louder arguments, or more lines drawn in the sand. We need something else, something urgent. We need to remember that the strength of a country is not found in its borders, but in its bonds. Not in its power, but in its people. Because if we want an America that thrives tomorrow, we must choose, right now, to put people first. Not later, not someday, now. When a nation forgets its people, it forgets the very reason it was built in the first place. A country does not begin with laws, borders, or constitutions. It begins with human beings who needed safety, belonging, and a place where their lives mattered. And when the people who carry the weight of society, especially its men, start to feel unseen, unheard, or unnecessary, the nation begins to crack from the inside, long before anything breaks on the outside. A society weakens the moment it asks men to be strong, without giving them a place to feel human. For generations, men were told that their value came from what they provide, how much they endure, or how well they hide their fear. But when a man is reduced to a role instead of recognized as a person, he slowly disconnects from himself, from others, and eventually from the nation he's expected to serve. A country cannot demand strength from men while denying them the space to feel vulnerable, afraid, or in need of support. A nation begins to drift the moment women start expecting men to be unbreakable, instead of understanding that men break silently. Many women see the surface, confidence, calmness, responsibility, without realizing the storms men carry inside. It's not because women don't care. It's because the world never taught them what men were never allowed to say. When women understand a man's unspoken battles, they don't weaken him, they give him permission to come home to himself again. A country loses direction when men feel they must compete with the world, but cannot confess that they sometimes feel lost in it. Men are often blamed for being distant, cold, or unemotional, yet few ask what loneliness does to someone who believes he has no right to be understood. When a man believes his pain is a burden, he disconnects not because he doesn't love, but because he doesn't want to disappoint the people he loves. A nation starts to break when men stop believing they have a meaningful place in it. Purpose is oxygen for men. Without it, they do not simply feel uncertain, they feel invisible. And when enough men feel invisible, a country begins to lose the very backbone it depends on. A nation remembers its purpose when it remembers its people. And that begins when men no longer have to choose between being human and being strong. Loyalty to humanity is greater than loyalty to lines on a map, because borders don't raise families, fight silent battles, or carry the weight of expectation. People do. A nation can draw lines on paper, but those lines have no meaning if the people living inside them feel disconnected from one another. And when men, who are often taught to define themselves by duty and identity, feel more pressure to belong to a country than to themselves or the people they love, the human connection that holds a nation together begins to fade. A country becomes fragile the moment a man feels he must choose loyalty to a system over loyalty to his own emotional truth. Men are often told that patriotism means toughness, sacrifice, and silence, that serving the nation means suppressing their own needs. But when men are conditioned to prioritize the idea of a nation over their own humanity, they aren't becoming stronger citizens. They're becoming emotionally isolated individuals who no longer know where they truly belong. A society drifts off course when women expect men to stand firm for the nation while overlooking the human needs those men quietly carry. Many women admire men's sense of duty and resilience, but they sometimes forget that the same men who feel responsible for the safety of a country also feel responsible for protecting the people at home. When women understand that men often hide their emotional wounds for fear of appearing weak, they become partners in restoring the humanity that systems and borders can never provide. A nation begins to lose its center when men feel pressure to represent strength for the world but cannot find a place to express vulnerability in their own lives. Men are often caught between public expectations and private emotions, expected to show unshakable loyalty outwardly while quietly fighting internal battles. When a man feels more obligated to remain loyal to an ideology than to acknowledge his own humanity, he disconnects not because he lacks courage, but because he lacks permission. A country becomes stronger when men recognize that their first loyalty is not to the abstract idea of a nation, but to the people who fill their life with meaning. Men thrive when their identity isn't limited to service, status, or national pride, but expanded to include connection, compassion, and emotional truth. And when enough men embrace that humanity as their real North Star, the borders on the map stop dividing us and start reminding us who we're responsible for becoming. A country is only as strong as the people who feel seen, because no policy, institution, or symbol can replace the power of a human being who believes they matter. A nation can build armies, economies, and structures, but if the people holding up those structures feel invisible, the foundation silently weakens. And when men, who are often conditioned to stay quiet about their needs, begin to feel unseen, the country loses not just individuals, but the emotional force that keeps families, communities, and entire societies stable. A society begins to fracture when men no longer feel recognized for more than what they produce. Men are frequently valued for their output, how hard they work, how much they provide, how much they endure. But when a man is appreciated only for his performance and never acknowledged for his emotional world, he starts living behind a mask. The moment a man feels like no one notices what he carries inside, he disconnects, not out of pride, but out of self-protection. And when enough men disconnect, the nation they support begins to hollow out from within. A nation weakens when women misinterpret men's silence as indifference rather than exhaustion. Many women look at the men in their lives and see calmness where there is actually pressure, steadiness where there is actually fear, and distance where there is actually emotional fatigue. This is not because women don't care, but because men have been taught that to be seen is to be exposed. Yet when women understand the quite emotional signals men never learn to express, they become mirrors that help men feel recognized again. A country loses its unity the moment men stop believing their struggles are worth acknowledging. Men rarely ask to be seen. They assume they must endure. They shoulder burdens silently, hoping their resilience is enough. But when a man feels unseen long enough, he doesn't just lose motivation, he loses his sense of place in the world. A nation cannot thrive when the very people expected to hold it up feel forgotten in the process. A nation grows stronger when men feel that being seen doesn't threaten their identity, but strengthens it. Men are not asking for sympathy. They are asking for recognition that their emotional world matters just as much as their obligations. And when they receive it, they don't become less strong, they become more grounded, more connected, and more committed to the world around them because they finally feel like they belong in it. Empathy is a national strength, not a personal weakness, because a country rises not through force or competition, but through the emotional intelligence of the people who hold it together. Nations often celebrate power, strategy, and resilience, but rarely do they celebrate the courage it takes to understand another human being. And for men who have been taught that empathy is soft, fragile, or unmanly, this misunderstanding does more damage to a nation's fabric than any external threat ever could. A society becomes emotionally malnourished when men are raised to believe that strength means shutting down their feelings. Men learn early that tears are dangerous, vulnerability is risky, and empathy is something to suppress rather than develop. Yet when a man shuts off empathy toward others, he eventually shuts down empathy toward himself. That inner disconnect is where national weakness begins, not in policy, not in politics, but in the hearts of the men who no longer know how to feel without shame. A nation limits its growth when women interpret men's emotional restraint as disinterest instead of conditioning. Many women desire closeness, communication, and emotional presence without realizing that men have been taught to feel but never taught how to express what they feel. Women often think men don't care, when in reality, men care deeply but quietly. When women understand that a man's silence is often the cost of his upbringing and not a lack of emotion, they help rebuild the connection men struggle to show. A country loses potential when men believe empathy diminishes their identity instead of expanding it. Men are often praised for being stoic, logical, or unshakable, but rarely for being understanding or emotionally aware. Yet empathy is what allows a man to become a better father, a better partner, a better leader. It is empathy that allows him to see beyond his own world and understand the experiences of others. When empathy is dismissed, men carry their struggles alone, and the nation loses the benefit of their emotional contribution. A nation becomes stronger when men embrace empathy as part of their strength rather than a threat to it. Empathy does not make men less capable. It makes them more human. It helps them form deeper bonds, make wiser decisions, and build healthier families and communities. And when men learn that empathy is not an embarrassment, but an advantage, they create a ripple effect that strengthens the emotional foundation of the entire country, making it more united, more resilient, and more human. We rise together only when no one is left behind, because the strength of any nation is measured not by its loudest victories, but by its quiet willingness to care for those who struggle in silence. A country cannot move forward when half its people feel unseen, unheard, or misunderstood, and for many men who are conditioned to hide their weaknesses and carry burdens alone, being left behind often happens quietly, long before anyone notices something is wrong. A society fails its potential when men begin to believe that their struggles disqualify them from belonging. Men are taught to be protectors, providers, the calm in every storm, but no one teaches them what to do when the storm is inside them. They worry that admitting fear makes them unreliable, that expressing pain makes them unworthy, and that slowing down makes them a liability. When a man feels he must recover alone, he distances himself from the very people who would have lifted him up, not because he doesn't trust them, but because he doesn't want to burden them. A nation drifts apart when women misinterpret a man's withdrawal as avoidance instead of silent exhaustion. Many women look at the men in their lives and see distance, when what they're really seeing is a lifetime of being told, figure it out yourself. Men rarely step back because they don't care. They step back because they don't know how to ask for help without feeling ashamed. When women understand the unspoken battles men carry, their support becomes a bridge that brings men back into connection instead of pushing them further into isolation. A country cannot rise when men feel the only acceptable version of themselves is the one that never needs anything. Men are often celebrated for self-sacrifice, but rarely for self-awareness. They're praised for pushing through pain, but rarely for acknowledging it. This pushes men toward emotional isolation. And emotional isolation eventually becomes national isolation, because a nation full of disconnected men becomes a nation full of disconnected families, disconnected communities, and disconnected futures. A society becomes stronger when men realize that rising together doesn't mean appearing strong, it means being supported. Men need spaces where they can speak without judgment, break without ridicule, and heal without hiding. When men feel safe enough to be human, they show up more fully as leaders, partners, fathers, and friends. They contribute not from fear or pressure, but from purpose and connection. A nation elevates itself when women recognize that their understanding can help men find the courage they were never taught to express. And a nation transforms when men learn that accepting support is not weakness but wisdom, because we only rise together when everyone rises. When no man feels discarded, no woman feels unheard, and no person feels unworthy of being lifted. A future worth building starts with the people we protect today, because the strength of tomorrow is shaped by the emotional safety we create right now. A nation can plan, strategize, innovate, and dream, But none of it matters if the people who carry those dreams forward feel unprotected in their own lives. For men especially, who are often expected to protect others while rarely feeling protected themselves, the future becomes uncertain long before the nation realizes something has gone wrong. A society risks its stability when men learn to protect the world while believing they must ignore their own needs. Men are raised to be shields, to stand tall, to be the ones others lean on. But a man who is always a shield eventually forgets that he is also a human being. When he suppresses fear, disguises pain, or minimizes his emotional needs, he doesn't become stronger. He becomes quietly overwhelmed. And when men become overwhelmed, the entire system they support becomes fragile without anyone noticing. A nation limits its potential when women see a man's strength, but not the strain beneath it. Many women admire men for their resilience, their calmness under pressure, and their ability to endure. But what often goes unseen is the emotional weight those men carry behind the scenes. Men rarely announce when they're struggling. They hint, they withdraw, they work harder, they grow quieter. When women learn to recognize these signals, they become part of the protection men have long been denied but desperately need. A country weakens when men feel responsible for the future but disconnected from the present. Men are often encouraged to sacrifice, to push forward, to think long-term, to provide. But when their emotional life is left unprotected, they stop feeling connected to the world they're supposed to build. A man cannot plan for tomorrow if he feels unseen today. And when men feel invisible, they disengage, not because they lack ambition, but because they lack emotional grounding. A society loses direction when it expects men to give everything while receiving very little understanding in return. Men are praised for dedication, for hard work, for commitment, yet they are rarely praised for emotional honesty or vulnerability, even though those qualities build stronger relationships and healthier communities. When a man feels he must hide his true self to remain valuable, he slowly stops believing that he has a place in the future he's working so hard to create. A nation grows stronger when men feel protected not just physically, but emotionally. Emotional protection means having someone who sees the man behind the responsibilities, someone who acknowledges his unspoken fears, someone who makes it safe for him to express what he has been taught to hide. When men feel emotionally supported, they show up with greater clarity, compassion, and purpose. A country thrives when women understand that their encouragement can reopen doors men have silently closed. And it flourishes when men learn that being protected does not diminish their identity, it deepens it. Because the future doesn't begin with plans, systems, or laws. It begins with people who feel valued today, protected today, and emotionally safe enough to contribute to tomorrow with their whole heart.